It was raining the morning I found the blueprints. Not just any rain, the kind that feels heavy with memory, the kind that makes you stop what you're doing and listen to the rhythm of old promises tapping against the window. I was sorting through Thomas's things, months after the funeral, trying to be strong for the children, or maybe pretending to be. 40 years of marriage, and I thought I knew the man better than anyone. But that morning, with my trembling hands brushing the dust from those folded papers, I realized I might have been living in a house built entirely out of lies. The blueprint was dated 1979, with his handwriting across the top corner. For her. Not for us. Not for Evelyn. Just her. My heart paused. Thomas's bold, neat script, the one I'd watched him use for grocery lists, love notes, and home sketches, suddenly felt like a stranger's mark. I sat back in the chair by the attic window, the rain smudging the edges of the world outside, and I whispered to myself, "Who are you really building for, Thomas?" When Thomas and I first married, we were two kids with nothing but dreams and hand-me-down furniture. He promised me, one evening under the stars, that he'd build us a house someday. "A house that'll stand longer than our wrinkles," he'd said, his thumb tracing my cheek. I laughed then. I believed him with every piece of my heart. And he did build a house, our house. Or at least that's what I thought. It wasn't grand, but it was full of love. I painted the walls myself. He built the porch swing, where we'd drink coffee every morning. When Grace was born, we planted a cherry tree in the backyard. When Michael came along, we built a treehouse. Every nail, every board, it all told the story of us. So, how could there be another set of blueprints? Another her? I didn't tell Grace or Michael about what I found.
Not yet.
They'd just say it was my grief talking. Grace was always the practical one, the kind who organized Thomas's memorial with color-coded folders and floral charts. Michael was more like his father, restless, stubborn, heart on his sleeve. They both adored their dad. I didn't want to be the mother who shattered that image. That night, I called Helen Davenport, my oldest friend. We'd known each other since high school, when Thomas used to bring me flowers after choir practice. Helen married a banker, moved 3 states away, but she never missed a Christmas card or a late-night chat. When I told her about the blueprints, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "Evelyn, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe it's just something he worked on for someone else." "I know what you're thinking," I said. "But the handwriting, the note, it felt personal." "Do you remember anyone named Laura Whitman?" she asked suddenly. The name hit me like cold water. "Why?" Helen hesitated. "Because Thomas and Laura worked together years ago, didn't they? When he did those renovations for the Whitmans' summer home?" My throat tightened. I hadn't thought about Laura Whitman in decades. She was beautiful, too beautiful for this world. Elegant, graceful, with a smile that could light up an entire room. Married to Henry Whitman, a wealthy contractor known for his high-end designs. Thomas had helped him with a few projects back in the late 70s. Back then, I was proud of Thomas. He was ambitious, hardworking, loyal. And Laura? She was friendly. Too friendly, if I'm being honest. I remember one evening, she brought a bottle of wine over to celebrate the project. I was pregnant with Grace at the time, and I noticed the way her hand lingered on Thomas's arm when she thanked him. I told myself I was being silly. Thomas only had eyes for me. Or so I believed. I spent that night staring at the blueprint, tracing every line. There was something familiar about it, the structure, the design. It wasn't our house, but it looked eerily similar. A 2-story home with white pillars and a wraparound porch. But there was one small difference, a name scribbled faintly in the corner.
Ered Whitman.
I couldn't breathe. Had he built her a version of our dream? The next morning, I drove to Pastor Reynolds's church. He'd known us both for years, married us, baptized our children, buried Thomas. I needed someone who wouldn't think I'd lost my mind. He listened quietly, his wrinkled hands folded over his Bible. "Evelyn," he said gently, "sometimes grief digs up questions that were better left buried. Are you sure you want to know what this means?" "I spent 40 years loving a man who might have been living a lie," I said. I think I deserve the truth.
He sighed.
Then start where the secrets began. The Whitmans' old property. Henry passed years ago. I believe the estate still stands outside Maplewood. That afternoon I drove out there. The rain had stopped, but the sky hung heavy with gray. When I turned down the long, winding driveway, my heart began to pound. The house at the end of the road was breathtaking. White pillars, porch swing, cherry tree in the yard. My breath caught. It was nearly identical to ours. A woman stood by the gate, Abigail Miller, a young woman no older than 30, waving politely as I slowed the car. "Are you here for the open house?" she called out. "Open house," I repeated, stepping out. "Yes," she said with a bright smile. "This place has been vacant for years. The Whitman family's selling it. I'm just the caretaker." Vacant.
Selling.
My mind reeled. I walked up the path, my shoes crunching over gravel. The porch creaked beneath my feet, just like ours back home. And then I saw it, a carved plaque beside the front door. Built by T. Carter, 1980. My knees nearly gave out. Abigail steadied me. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She tilted her head. "Funny, everyone around here says he built it for someone special. Never knew who she was." Her words echoed in my chest like a gunshot. For someone special. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain returned, tapping the roof like the ghost of my past. I sat by the window, staring at Thomas's photograph on the mantel, wondering what kind of man hides another life behind his smile. I whispered to his picture. "Was it her, Thomas? Was she the one you built it for?" And then, for the first time, I noticed something else in the photo frame. A faded letter, tucked behind the picture, sealed and yellowed with time. Written in the same familiar handwriting. My name on the front. I hesitated. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The envelope was thin, fragile, almost afraid to be opened. And just before I could tear it open, a memory flashed, his last words before he died. "Everything I built was for you, Evelyn. You'll understand someday." But what if he lied? I held my breath, staring at the envelope, heart racing between love and betrayal. I whispered, "If I open this, nothing will ever be the same." And with that thought, I blew out the candle beside me, the letter still unopened, and the room fell into silence. The letter trembled in my hands for a long while before I opened it. I could hear the rain whispering against the glass, as if the sky itself wanted me to stop. But I had lived too long with half-truths. Too long loving a man who still had pieces of himself hidden away. I slid my finger under the seal. The paper tore softly, like the sigh of a ghost. Inside, there were only a few lines written in Thomas's unmistakable hand. "If you're reading this, I'm sorry. There are things I never had the courage to say out loud. Go to the Maplewood house. You'll find the rest of me there."
No signature. No explanation.
Just those words, heavy, cryptic, final. I folded the letter slowly, the weight of it pressing against my chest. "The rest of me," I whispered. "What did you mean by that, Thomas?" The next morning I called Grace. My daughter's voice was brisk as ever, the way she always sounded when she was trying to hold the family together. "Mom, you sound tired. Are you okay?"
Are you fine, Ered?
"I just found something your father left behind." "What kind of something?" "Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew."
Grace sighed.
"Mom, please don't start chasing ghosts again. You've been through enough." "I'm not chasing ghosts," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm chasing the truth." Before she could answer, I hung up. I didn't have the strength to argue. By noon, I was standing once more before that white house in Maplewood. The caretaker, Abigail Miller, greeted me with a polite smile. "Back again?" "Yes," I said softly. "Your open house, is it still open?" "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "Feel free to look around." As I crossed the threshold, something inside me shifted. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The wooden floors creaked like an echo from the past. Every corner felt familiar, yet foreign, like walking through a dream you've had too many times to forget. I wandered through the rooms until I reached the upstairs hallway. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating the faded wallpaper. That's when I saw it, a photograph hanging crooked on the wall. It was Thomas, younger, smiling, his arm around another woman. Laura Whitman. My stomach dropped. The frame was dusty, the colors faded, but there was no mistaking that smile. My husband, the man who told me I was his one and only, standing beside a woman whose beauty had once haunted me. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice trembling. "Abigail?" She appeared in the doorway. "Yes, ma'am? Do you know who the people in this photo are?" She looked at it for a moment. "That's the Whitmans," she said casually. "Henry and Laura. This house used to belong to them before it was left vacant." "Why?" I pointed to the man beside Laura. "That's not Henry." Her brow furrowed. "Are you sure?" I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I'd know that face anywhere. She blinked, realization dawning. "You mean?" "Yes," I whispered. "That's my husband." I turned away before she could say another word. My knees felt weak, my heart pounding in my ears. I stumbled into the nearest room, what looked like a study. Papers were stacked on an old desk, covered in dust. I wiped one clean, revealing sketches in Thomas's hand. Floor plans.
Notes.
Measurements. And in the corner of every page, for her. My chest tightened. My world, once steady and safe, was now splitting open like rotten wood. Then something else caught my eye, a small wooden box tucked beneath the desk. Inside was a stack of letters, bound with a silk ribbon. My fingers trembled as I lifted the top one. The handwriting was elegant, looping, Laura Whitman. "My dearest Thomas, the house is nearly finished. I can't believe it's real. You've built me more than walls. You've built me a place to dream again. Henry suspects nothing, but sometimes I wonder if your wife knows. She seems so kind, so unaware. I feel guilty, but I can't stop loving you." My hands went cold. I sank into the chair, the words blurring before my eyes. The woman I'd once welcomed into my home had been writing love letters to my husband. And the house, this perfect, gleaming house, wasn't just a project. It was a monument to betrayal. I don't remember how long I sat there. Time stopped existing. All I could hear was Thomas's voice echoing in my head. "You'll understand someday." Understand what? That love was fragile? That even devotion can hide deceit? By the time I left the house, the sky had turned gray again. "No," she said gently. "You are a wife who trusted her husband. That's not foolishness. That's love." "I don't know what to do now." "You need to know everything," Helen said firmly. "Go back. There's always more to find when you think you've reached the end." And so, the next day, I did. The caretaker, Abigail, was gone. The house was quiet. I wandered upstairs again, into what must have been Laura's bedroom. It was elegant, with floral wallpaper peeling at the edges. The faint scent of old perfume lingered in the air. And then I saw something behind the dresser, a hidden panel, slightly ajar. I pulled it open. Inside was a metal box, covered in dust. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Thomas and Laura together, laughing, painting the house, sitting under the cherry tree. And then one that made my blood run cold. A photo of Laura holding a baby. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, were 3 words. "Our little Grace." My vision blurred. My heart felt like it stopped. That couldn't be. That was my daughter's name. My Grace. But the photo wasn't her. The child was a baby girl with curls and dimples, but not mine. Not my Grace. I stared at it, shaking. Was it possible? Did Thomas have another child? Another family? The air in the room seemed to vanish. I stumbled backward, my chest heaving. The silence broke only by the ticking of a nearby clock, steady, merciless. I dropped the photo, my breath catching in my throat. "Thomas," I whispered. "What did you do?" And then, from somewhere in the house below, a floorboard creaked. I froze. Someone else was here. The sound of that creaking floorboard turned my blood to ice. I stood there, frozen in the middle of Laura Whitman's old bedroom, clutching the photograph of the baby in one shaking hand. The house had been silent for hours, empty, or so I thought. I listened. Another creak. Then soft footsteps.
Slow.
Careful. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. The footsteps moved closer, stopping just outside the door. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer. Only the hum of the wind against the window pane. I took a step forward, my heart hammering. "I know someone's here. Come out." And then, from the doorway, a voice, soft, trembling, said, "Mrs. Harris?" It was Abigail, the caretaker. I exhaled, relief and anger flooding through me all at once. "Good Lord, Abigail, you scared me half to death." I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I saw your car outside and thought you might need help." Her eyes darted toward the box in my hands. "You found something." I hesitated, then held up the photograph. "Do you know who this is?" She glanced at it, frowning. "I've seen her before. There's an old woman in town, says she used to babysit a little girl named Grace Whitman, back in the 80s, I think. Said the mother was always away, traveling." My mouth went dry. "Grace Whitman." Abigail nodded.
Yeah.
"Why?" I sank into a chair, my whole body trembling. "Because that's my husband's handwriting on the back. And that child, she isn't mine." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, marking every painful second of realization. Abigail looked at me gently. "Maybe you shouldn't do this alone, Mrs. Harris." But I was already beyond stopping. I've been alone long enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, the photograph on my lap, the firelight flickering across Thomas's old face in our wedding portrait.
Who were you really?
I whispered to the empty room. What kind of man hides an entire life behind a locked door?
Grace called 3 times.
I ignored her.
What could I possibly say?
That her father might have had another child, a girl named Grace, no less? That everything we believed about our family was built on a lie? Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to Helen Davenport's house. She answered the door in her robe, her eyes widening. "Evelyn? What on earth?" "I found this," I said, thrusting the photo toward her. She studied it under the porch light. "That's Thomas," she said softly. "And my God, that looks like Laura's baby." She called her Grace. Helen looked up sharply. "Grace? Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's written on the back, in his handwriting." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh, Evelyn, did you know?" I demanded, my voice cracking. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I suspected. Years ago. But Thomas, he was so devoted to you. I couldn't believe he'd truly loved someone else." "No," she said quietly. "That he could carry that kind of guilt for so long." I turned away, tears burning my eyes. "He built that house for her, Helen. For Laura. And I think he raised that child in secret. Maybe helped them somehow, financially, I don't know. But he lied to me every single day of our marriage." Helen stepped closer. "Evelyn, you need to think carefully. There might be more to this than what it looks like." "I don't care," I said. "I need the truth." The next morning, I went to the town archives. The clerk, a young woman with sharp glasses, helped me search old property records. "Maplewood, 1984, I said. She scanned her computer. "Here we are." The original owner was listed as Henry Whitman, but interesting. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward me. The mortgage was paid off early by someone named Thomas Harris. My stomach dropped. I thanked her and stumbled outside into the cold air. The world seemed smaller now, as if even the wind carried whispers of his betrayal. When I got home, Grace's car was already in the driveway. She rushed toward me the moment I opened the door. "Mom, you scared me," she said. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" "I've been busy," I said flatly. "With what?" "Finding out who your father really was." Grace frowned. "Mom, please don't do this." "Do what?" "Learn that he built a house for another woman? That he paid for it in full while telling me we couldn't afford a vacation?" that he had a child with her and named her Grace. Her face went pale. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Where did you even hear that? I saw the proof. I handed her the photo. She stared at it for a long moment, then shook her head violently.
No.
No, that's not him. That can't be. It is. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Why are you doing this, Mom?
He's gone.
Let him rest. Because I can't rest until I know everything. She set the photo down, trembling. What if you're wrong? What if there's another explanation? Then I'll live with that, I said. But I can't live with lies anymore. Grace walked away, muttering under her breath, "You're going to destroy yourself over this." Maybe she was right, but something deep in my bones told me there was still more hidden beneath the surface, something darker. That evening, I returned to Maplewood again.
The house was different this time.
The air felt heavy, almost watchful. As I entered, I saw fresh flowers on the table. Someone else had been there. I climbed the stairs, my pulse racing, and noticed a faint glow under the study door. I pushed it open. Abigail was there, sorting through the drawers. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She jumped, startled. "Mrs. Harris. I was just cleaning up." "Don't lie to me." Her eyes darted toward the box on the desk. I stepped forward. "You knew, didn't you? About him. About Laura." Her lips trembled. "I didn't know everything. But I knew someone came here often, long after Laura passed. An older man. Quiet. He'd sit by the window for hours. I think he missed her. That was my husband." She nodded slowly. I figured. He looked broken. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. "When did this happen?" "The last time I saw him was maybe a year before he died." A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. Thomas had come here, to this house, just a year before his heart gave out. He hadn't been on a fishing trip like he told me. He'd been here. With her memory. Abigail hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "He left this here once. Said it was for someone named Grace. I didn't know who that was. I never mailed it." I took it with trembling hands. The handwriting was his. My husband's.
I tore it open.
"To my Grace. If life had been kinder, I would have told you the truth sooner. I did what I thought was right, but right and good are not always the same. I hope one day you'll forgive me for building a dream that belonged to someone else. Love, Dad." I stared at the words until they blurred. My knees buckled. Abigail caught me before I fell. "Mrs. Harris," she whispered, "are you all right?" "No," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't think I ever was." That night, I told Grace everything. She sat in silence, her hands shaking. "So, he had another daughter?" she whispered. "It seems so." Grace stared into the fire. "Do you think she's still alive?" "I don't know," I said softly. "But I intend to find out." She looked at me, fear and anger flickering behind her eyes. "Mom, please let it go. It's been 40 years. "I can't," I said. "Because somewhere out there is a woman who shares your father's blood, and she deserves to know what kind of man he really was." Grace's voice cracked. "And what about me? What am I supposed to do with this?" I didn't have an answer. She stood up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're tearing apart everything we have left." As she walked out the door, the photograph slipped from my lap and landed face down on the floor. I bent to pick it up and froze. There was another message written on the back, faint and almost hidden under the first words. It read, "Bury this truth if you love her." I sat there in silence, the firelight flickering against my face, the house echoing with the ghosts of promises that were never real. I finally understood the terrible choice Thomas had made between 2 families, 2 lives, and the cruel legacy he'd left behind. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. Because somewhere in this town, Grace Whitman might still be alive. And I needed to find her. It's strange how silence can hurt more than words. After Rebecca's confession, my world grew quiet, unbearably quiet. Every creak of the old house, Every tick of the clock reminded me of the years I had spent believing in a dream that was never meant for me. The house Thomas built, the house I thought symbolized our love, now stood as a monument of betrayal. But grief has a way of transforming into something sharper when truth surfaces. Resolve. I sat in my rocking chair that night, staring at the blueprint Thomas once showed me when we were newly married. The lines of that dream home had been drawn with my initials in the corner. EP, but when I looked closer, when the lamplight caught the faint smudges of pencil beneath the ink, I saw something else, another set of initials beneath mine.
Ered.
Rebecca Lane. The woman I had invited into my home, trusted as a friend, had been written into my husband's legacy. Literally. I felt my breath catch, trembling not from weakness, but from fury. 40 years of silence, of sacrifice, of devotion. And this was the truth buried beneath it all. The next morning I made a decision. Enough of mourning. Enough of wondering. I would face Rebecca and the ghost of my husband, once and for all. I drove to the house Thomas built on the outskirts of Maplewood. The air was still, the leaves rustling like whispers of unfinished confessions. The moment I stepped onto the porch, my knees weakened. It was exactly how Thomas had described our dream home. The pale blue shutters, the rose garden, even the front swing I'd once said I wanted. Except it wasn't mine. The door opened before I could knock. Rebecca stood there, her expression pale and trembling. Behind her, the home looked lived in, filled with photographs, flowers, and laughter that didn't belong to me. "Evelyn," she whispered, guilt dripping from every syllable. I looked her dead in the eye. "You knew," I said quietly. "All these years, you knew what this house meant to me. You let me believe it was built for us." Tears spilled down her cheeks. He loved you in his way," she said. "But Thomas and I—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare say his name like you earned it." The silence that followed was heavier than the years we had both carried. Rebecca stepped aside, and I walked inside. The smell of cedar and old paint flooded my senses, the same scent Thomas loved when we built our first cottage. My hands trembled as I traced the mantel, my eyes landing on a framed photograph of Thomas and Rebecca, taken decades ago. The housewarming party I was never invited to. I turned to her. "Why, Rebecca? You had everything, a husband, children, a life. Why take mine too?" She sobbed, covering her face. "Because I wanted what you had with him. The way he looked at you, the way you made him laugh. But when he came to me, I couldn't say no. I thought he'd leave you eventually, but he never did. He just built this house for both of us." My chest ached, not from heartbreak anymore, but from the weight of realizing I had been living in the shadow of two lives, both built on lies. I walked toward the door, but stopped at the threshold. "You can keep the house," I said softly, "but you'll never have peace in it. Because every wall, every stone, every window carries the truth, and the truth doesn't stay silent forever." As I stepped outside, a figure approached, Inspector Charles Lane, Rebecca's husband. His face was drawn, pale with disbelief. "Evelyn," he said quietly, I know." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a copy of Thomas's original will, one I'd never seen before. It named me as the sole heir to the property at Cedar Grove. My knees nearly gave out. "Why would she hide this?" I whispered. Charles looked away. "Because if you knew, you would have taken the house years ago. And she couldn't bear losing what she thought was hers." Rebecca stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth trembling as the truth unraveled in front of her. For the first time, she looked small, not powerful or cunning, but utterly broken. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply handed the will back to Charles. "You do what's right," I said. "I don't need that house anymore. It's just wood and stone. My peace is elsewhere." That evening, I returned to my little cottage, the one Thomas and I had first shared when we were poor but honest. The sunset bled gold across the sky, and I felt something release inside me. I thought of Grace Whitmore, my closest friend, who'd always told me, "The truth always costs something, Evelyn. But peace? Peace is earned. The next day, I received a letter from Rebecca. The handwriting was shaky. Evelyn, you were right. I lived in a house built on lies. I can't undo what I did, but I'll leave the property to your grandchildren. Maybe they'll make something good out of what we destroyed. Rebecca. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I simply folded the letter and placed it beside Thomas's old photo. You built the wrong home, Thomas, I murmured, but maybe, somehow, it'll still shelter the right hearts. As I sat by the window that night, the wind rustling the curtains like whispers from the past, I realized the greatest justice isn't punishment, it's peace. And peace was finally mine. It's been almost a year since that day at Cedar Grove, the day truth finally stopped hiding in the shadows. I still remember walking away from that grand blue house, the one Thomas promised would be ours, and realizing that peace doesn't live in walls or windows. It lives inside the heart that dares to let go. In the months that followed, I didn't seek revenge, and I didn't want pity. I simply began again, quietly, like the dawn after a long, stormy night. My small cottage, once filled with echoes of loneliness, became warm again. I started tending to the garden Thomas and I had planted decades ago, roses just like the ones he grew by that other house. But this time, they felt mine. Every bloom carried forgiveness instead of sorrow. Grace Whitmore came by often, her voice still sharp as ever. "You look lighter, Evelyn," she told me one afternoon as we sipped tea on the porch. Like someone who finally laid down a heavy stone. I smiled faintly. "Maybe I did," I said. Maybe the stone was never Thomas or Rebecca. Maybe it was the hope I refused to stop carrying. Grace nodded knowingly. Hope's a heavy thing when it's chained to the past. She was right. For so many years, I had loved a man who was more memory than truth. And for decades, I had lived in the illusion that love, once promised, must always be returned. But love, I've learned, doesn't owe us loyalty, only lessons. One morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, and deliberate. I opened it slowly, feeling a tremor of déjà vu. It was from Charles Lane. "Mrs. Parker, Rebecca passed peacefully last month. In her final days, she asked that I send you this. She wanted you to know she never lived another day in that house after your confrontation. She said she couldn't bear the sound of the truth in its walls. She also finalized the papers. The property at Cedar Grove now belongs to your family. She said it's what Thomas would have wanted. Sincerely, Charles Lane." I sat for a long while with that letter in my lap, the sunlight spilling through my curtains like a quiet blessing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel triumph. Only a strange, gentle sorrow, the kind that comes when life finally folds a chapter you thought would never end. That evening, I took Thomas's photograph down from the mantel. His young, smiling face stared back at me, frozen in time, untouched by guilt or consequence. I traced his outline gently with my fingertip. "You built me a dream, Thomas," I whispered. "You just forgot to live in it with me." I walked outside, into the tender hush of twilight. The air smelled of earth and rain. The roses glowed faintly in the fading light, pink, soft, forgiving. I knelt beside them and pressed the letter into the soil, letting the earth reclaim what was once heavy in my heart. I could almost hear Grace's laughter echoing from inside. "You burying your pain out there, Evelyn?" "Something like that," I called back. Letting the garden keep the secrets now. That night, I slept without dreams for the first time in years. Weeks later, my granddaughter, Lily, came to visit. She was young, bright-eyed, full of questions about the past. "Grandma," she asked one evening, "is it true Grandpa built a house for someone else?" Children have a way of asking the hardest questions with the softest voices. I looked at her, this small, curious soul with my eyes and his smile, and I said gently, "Yes, sweetheart. But that house was just made of wood and nails. What he built with me was a life, and even if it cracked, it still stood long enough to raise the ones we love." She nodded thoughtfully. "So you forgave him?" I smiled. "Forgiveness isn't something you give to the person who hurt you. It's something you give to yourself so you can stop living in their story. Lily didn't quite understand. Not yet, but she hugged me tight, and that was enough. When she went to bed, I stepped outside once more, standing beneath the moonlight that washed over the fields. The wind carried the faint scent of roses, and in that quiet, I could almost hear Thomas's voice, distant, regretful, tender. "Evelyn," it seemed to say, "I'm sorry." "I know," I whispered back. "And I'm free now." The years had taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace after the storm tries to steal it. It's about choosing to love life again, even when it betrayed you once. The house at Cedar Grove may bear my name now, but it's not mine to live in. It belongs to the younger ones, to the future, where stories heal instead of haunt. Sometimes, I walk by that road and see the lights flickering in its windows, laughter spilling into the night. I don't see ghosts anymore. I see renewal. I see the courage to build again, this time on truth. I'll tell you something, dear listener, 40 years can teach you many things. It can teach you how fragile trust is, how strong a heart must become, and how, even after love fails you, you can still choose grace. Because life isn't about the promises kept or broken. It's about who you become after the breaking. And as I close my story, I want you to remember this. The house may crumble, the heart may ache, but peace, once you build it inside yourself, no one can ever take away. Evelyn Parker. He built a house of lies, but I built a life of truth, and that's what still stands.